My name is Daniel Cross, and today I'm going to let you into a story that's been pressing against my chest for years. It isn't an easy story, but it's one that might make you rethink what it means to belong. Stay with me, because what happened inside my family's house changed everything I thought I knew about myself. Before we dive in, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Each message you leave reminds me these words are landing somewhere, not just echoing into empty space. It gives me the courage to keep sharing real stories like this one. When my father stood in front of everyone that night, he lifted his whiskey glass and praised my brother as if I wasn't even sitting there. I didn't react. The sting had been rehearsed so often it no longer surprised me. But something shifted inside me. Not rage, but a kind of cold, sharp clarity. You can go unseen only so long before you start wondering if you were ever there at all. I was 32, a corporate advisor in Riverbend, holding a life most people would envy, big clients, long hours, quiet apartments. Yet somehow I had ended up back at Cross Manor, my parents' estate just outside Fairhaven, not out of nostalgia, not out of love, but because of a sealed packet that had been riding inside my jacket lining for 4 months. Heavier than it should have been. It was my father's founder's anniversary gala, his 62nd year. Edward Cross, head of Cross Holdings, measured life not in affection but in acquisitions. His gatherings were formal, frost-edged events built for status, not warmth, rooms of expensive suits, scripted greetings, and smiles that never reached anyone's eyes. I wasn't there for the toast or the food. I wasn't there to play the role of the prodigal son returning to the fold. I had come because I needed an answer, and I suspected it was hidden inside the packet pressing into my ribs at the far end of that long table, a ghost among my own bloodline. Every figure in that room belonged somewhere except me. Nathan, the oldest, broad-shouldered, unshakably sure of himself, managed the Chicago office of our family's investment arm, and was already being called the future of the Cross name. Claire, the youngest, bright-eyed and effortlessly social, could calm any room with a few soft words. Even my father's stare softened for her. And then there was me, the middle one with a degree from Westbridge University and a career handling assets larger than the family's entire portfolio, yet still, just Daniel. The name is spoken politely, never proudly. To my father, I was the city boy who chose violin over sports, corporate life over inheritance, independence over loyalty. A misfit draped in expensive wool, barely endured at best, invisible at worst. Halfway through dinner, Edward rose, glass in hand, voice steady and commanding. "I'm proud of my children," he announced. "Each one carries forward the legacy of this family." He turned to Nathan first, his chest almost vibrating with pride, then to Claire, words of praise sliding off his tongue as easily as water over stone. When his gaze reached me, he paused, offered a faint smile, then took a drink. No words, no name. The conversation moved on. That silence rang louder than anything else in the room. My hand tightened on my glass until it creaked. The sealed packet in my jacket lining felt like a thorn. It wasn't just paper. It was the weight of every question I'd never dared to ask. A private DNA test I had taken after a strange phone call from someone who knew too much, but explained too little. I still hadn't opened it. Maybe because I feared the answer. Maybe because deep down, I already knew. I stood slowly. No one noticed. No one called my name. Not even Claire. Behind me, the clinking of cutlery and polite laughed. Air continued like background noise. My father's eyes never flicked to the empty chair I left behind. I can't pinpoint the first time I realized I wasn't wanted, not just disliked, but unnecessary. Maybe it was the Sunday when Nathan went with Dad to the Fairview Hawks game while I stayed behind with Mrs. Howard, the housekeeper. Or maybe it was the day I started practicing violin and my father told me, "That's not what strong men do." He never shouted. He never struck me. But his silence said louder than words. "You're not what I expected." I remember the only time he showed up to one of my milestones, my high school graduation. I was in the rented cap and gown, shaking hands with the principal, smiling as if it mattered. Afterwards, he pulled me aside and muttered, "Stop parading around in that outfit. It's just a private school." I removed it quietly, but something inside me cracked that day and never healed. One afternoon, soon after I'd begun college, I overheard Margaret Cross whispering to my aunt, "It's not Daniel's fault. It's the past." My stomach twisted. Later, when I asked her what she meant, she smiled faintly, put a soft hand over mine, and said, "You think too much." Her smile never reached her eyes, and her hand never really held on. The questions never stopped after that. Was it an accident? A shadow of something no one wanted to recall? My mother, Margaret, was gentle and quiet. She baked when I was sad and pressed her palm to my back when I came home late, but she never stood up for me. Not once when my father dismissed me. Not once when he excluded me. She was the kind of mother who'd touch your shoulder just before you fell, but never pull you back. Eventually, I stopped expecting to be caught. Even so, she was the only person I visited when I returned home, because even a soft ghost was better than nothing at all. My father never had to say, "I don't love you." He never once gave me a reason to believe he did. And that sealed packet? It's still in my jacket lining, a silent witness, a possible verdict. I haven't opened it yet, but I can feel it in my bones. The time is coming. For a moment not long ago, I thought I might finally be seen, maybe even accepted. 8 years of long nights and unending pressure had finally paid off. I was named senior market consultant at a top firm in Riverbend, a title that wasn't handed out easily. No one there cared about pedigree or last names. They cared about numbers, and mine spoke louder than most. To celebrate, I did something I thought might close the gap between me and my father. I bought a dark crossover vehicle, the exact model he once bragged was a real man's car. I had it delivered to Cross Manor in Fairhaven with a note that read simply, "I hope this makes you proud." 10 days went by. Nothing. No text, no call, not even a mention passed through Claire. Then my mother sent me a short message. "Your father parked it in the garage." He said, "Well, it's decent enough." That was all. I swallowed the ache and told myself maybe silence was better than rejection. At least he hadn't sent it back. At least it sat there. That had to count for something, didn't it? But illusions don't last. On a weekend visit, I cut across the backyard and caught him with his old business circle, whiskey glass in hand, laughing freely. Someone pointed at the car by the garage. He chuckled. A partner gave me that, trying to sweeten the next deal. No hesitation. No blink. Just a practiced lie he wore comfortably, like a tie he'd chosen on purpose. My name wasn't mentioned. I didn't correct him. I just stood behind the hedge, a stranger watching a scene that was never meant to include me. Later, Claire tried to soothe me. He liked it, I swear. He just doesn't show things well. But I had seen him show joy, pride, even tenderness, just never toward me, and I was beginning to understand why. It began as curiosity. DNA kits were trendy in finance circles, a novelty for tracing roots. I sent one in thinking I'd discover a bit about heritage. When the results arrived, a single line rearranged my life. No direct paternal match with listed father. I didn't cry, I didn't rage, I just stared while every memory shifted slightly, like furniture moved an inch in a familiar room. I told no one, but suspicion grew roots, wrapping around everything I thought I knew. One afternoon I returned home, slipped into the upstairs bathroom, and plucked a few hairs from my father's brush. I wrapped them carefully, mailed them to a private lab in Manhattan, and waited. One day before his founder's anniversary gala, a thick, sealed packet arrived on my desk. It sat there beside an untouched pen and a framed diploma photo he never showed up to see. The car had been meant as proof, as a bridge. Instead, it became a stage prop in his story, a convenient lie he could flash to friends. I didn't feel rejected anymore. I felt erased. That night I left the gala without ceremony. No argument, no scene. Just the slow walk of someone exiting a building already on fire, knowing there was nothing left inside worth saving. At the inn room, the packet lay on the desk like it had been waiting for me. I sat across from it in the dim light, whispering into the empty air. If he isn't my father, then what am I in this family? Memories didn't rush back. They seeped in like water under a door. Him praising Nathan as the one who'll carry the name, while telling me I should learn to cook so I wouldn't starve. The day I brought home an economics award, only to hear him mutter, "Data doesn't reveal truth. It just echoes noise." For years I believed he was tough on me because he wanted me to grow. Now I see it differently. I hadn't been growing. I'd been proving, offering sacrifice after sacrifice to a God who never once looked down. That night I called my mother. I didn't even know what I wanted, just the sound of her voice. She picked up on the third ring. "Mom," I asked quietly, "did you ever feel like I didn't belong in that house?" A long pause. Then her voice, soft and tired. "Daniel, there are things I can't speak inside that house. But you were never a mistake. Nothing more. And yet everything." The next morning, she asked me to grab some paperwork from the library room. The crossover vehicle gleamed in the driveway. An old neighbor strolled past, nodded, and said cheerfully, "Edward's new ride, huh? Heard a business partner gifted it. Men like him, they get perks." I smiled faintly, pressing my tongue to the roof of my mouth to hold back words. In the kitchen, Claire was peeling apples. I told her what I'd overheard. She winced. "He doesn't mean it that way. It's just easier for him to explain things." "No," I said. "This isn't about restraint. It's deliberate. It's erased." Passing the slightly open door of his executive suite, I heard his voice on the phone. "Daniel, he doesn't understand value. That one only lives to prove himself, not to build anything real. Not my son. That one." It was the smallest phrase, but it cut clean through. I walked out of the house empty-handed, carrying only a truth I could no longer ignore. Maybe I didn't even need to tear open that sealed packet. When someone has already made the choice that you aren't part of their bloodline, the test becomes irrelevant. I sat by the window in the inn room, a packet worn soft at the edges from nights of being turned over in my hands. 4 days had passed since it landed on my desk. I hadn't opened it, not out of fear, but because the truth had already settled into me like an unwelcome guest. It no longer felt like evidence. It felt like a release. What haunted me wasn't the paper. It was the thought that Edward Cross might have known the truth all along. If he had, then the frost in his voice, the hollow dismissals, the way he looked through me as if I were blocking his light. It all made a brutal kind of sense. It wasn't indifference. It was a decision. And I was the casualty of that decision. I needed another perspective. I called Nathan. We met in his executive suite. All glass walls, leather chairs, the air perfumed with success. He sat across from me, posture perfect, waiting for the point. I tried to circle it, but the question slipped out. "Did you ever think Dad treated me differently?" He didn't blink. "You don't match his mold, Daniel, that's all. You picked a path that doesn't fit the family plan. It's not personal. It's practical." His words fell sharp, like quarterly analysis, not the voice of a brother. I stood to leave, but as I reached the door, he added without turning his chair, "If you plan to stir things up at the gala, remember, not everyone's ready for the truth." It wasn't advice. It was a warning. That night, back at the inn, I turned the phrase over in my mind. The truth. Would speaking it change anything? Who would it break? And why did part of me still want to shout it until my voice cracked? A knock interrupted my thoughts. Claire stood outside, pale, holding a small, yellowed envelope. "I wasn't supposed to find this," she whispered. "But I did. Years ago. Mom handed it to me when I was helping clear the attic." The letter inside was dated 29 years ago, signed by David Turner. The writing was steady but urgent. "If you are pregnant, I'll take responsibility. Even if we can't be together, I'll do what I can. Just don't let the boy grow up feeling like he doesn't belong. The timeline matched the months before I was born at Westmont Institute's engineering department. My hands shook, but the words on the page didn't rewrite themselves. They stayed fixed, undeniable. I didn't cry, I didn't rage, I simply felt still, confirmed. I looked out at the city, but Fairhaven's lights felt colder now, the streets stretched farther away. I had carried the title of family failure, disappointment, but I hadn't failed. I had been deleted, erased. Edward hadn't just endured me, he had been sanding me out of the family portrait inch by inch. Never by declaring I didn't belong, but by never once saying I did. And now I know. I had the letter. I was silent. I had the years. Proof wasn't necessary anymore. 2 days before the gala, I sat in a quiet corner cafe on Brookside in Maine, a cup of coffee cooling untouched in my hand. The room felt slowed, haunted by memories that insisted on replaying. I thought back to a meeting 12 years ago inside the formal hall of Cross Manor. The family gathered, the air thick with legacy. That was the day Edward stood tall and declared, "When I turn 62, Cross Holdings will transfer to Nathan." The room applauded. Claire smiled politely, Nathan nodded humbly. I was at the peak of my career then, freshly profiled in the Eastern Financial Review for a piece on market strategy. Yet in that room, my name wasn't spoken once, like I wasn't even seated there. That memory stung sharper now than it had then. Later that day, I visited Mr. Whitmore, the family's longtime attorney. He had overseen every deal, every clause, every secret. I asked him directly about the will, about whether I had any place in it. He gave no clear answer. Instead, as I turned to leave, he said quietly, "Some things aren't written to be fair. They're written to keep order." Order. That was the creed of the Cross name. Status, image, control. And I had never fit that ironed definition of order. That night, Claire called. She asked me to meet her outside the house. When I arrived, her face was pale, eyes shadowed with something heavy. She drew a slow breath before releasing words she had held for far too long. "There's something you need to hear," Claire whispered that night. "When Mom was carrying you, Dad told her to end it. She refused. He never raised his voice, never struck her. But from that day forward, the silence began, and it never lifted. The words punched the air from my lungs. Every frost-ed look, every dismissal, every hollow glance. It hadn't been about grades or career choices or personality. It had been about existence itself. I had been allowed to breathe, but not to belong. To him, I wasn't a son. I was a disruption. A fracture in the story he wanted to tell. The next morning, I powered up my laptop. An email sat unread from a name I had only seen in letters. David Turner. The subject line read, "If you want to meet." Inside, a few plain sentences. "Daniel, I don't want to intrude. If you'd ever like to talk, I can come to Riverbend next week. If not, I understand. I only want to give you the choice." No speeches, no demand for forgiveness, just respect. A tone I had never once received from the man who raised me, and that, strangely, cut the deepest. I looked at David's letter, then at the sealed packet, then at the faded note Claire had given me. 3 blades, carving away the self I had tried so long to defend. I realized then, I hadn't been guarding a legacy. I had been guarding an illusion that never included me. The only question left was what I would do at the Founders' Anniversary Gala. Would I keep quiet, or would I force myself into view, knowing there would be no way back? That evening, I returned to Cross Manor. The kitchen was unchanged, same yellowed tiles, same wood cabinets, but the formal hall had stretched into something colder. The 5 of us ate with nearly 32 years of silence separating every chair. Edward asked Nathan about his latest Chicago office deal. He turned warmly to Claire, inquiring about her community benefit drive. His voice softened for both, then his eyes shifted to me, a curling grin. "So, Daniel, still selling dreams dressed as numbers in the Eastport district?" I gave a thin smile. He'd been using that line since the day I entered finance, calling my work bubble-blowing for clever men. It no longer stung. It simply echoed. Then something I hadn't expected happened. Margaret spoke. "Daniel was just appointed to the Strategic Advisory Board at Westmont Capital," she said, her voice steady. "He's the youngest ever to join." The table hushed. I didn't lift my head, but I could feel Edward measuring, weighing, deciding how to undercut it. He set down his silverware and muttered, "Firms these days will let anyone in if they need to fill a diversity quota." And just like that, I vanished from the table once more. After dinner, I stepped into the garden. The fountain trickled under a bruised sky. He stood there with a whiskey glass. I approached. "You knew all along I wasn't your son, didn't you?" No hesitation. "I gave you my name. That's more than most would." Then, deliberate and slow, "If you ruin tomorrow's gala, understand this. You won't just lose a father. You'll lose the name." My throat burned, but I pressed on. "Then tell me, what have you been trying to teach me all these years?" His eyes darkened. "That some things never bend, no matter how hard you push." Back at the inn, I opened David's email again. My fingers hovered, then typed, "I'm not ready to meet. But thank you. At least you never treated me like a mistake." No tears came, but something inside shifted. It felt like saying goodbye, not to a man, but to a hope I'd carried like a stone for too long. The next morning, I dressed in an ash-gray suit and returned to the estate. Guests filled the grounds, laughter mixing with the pop of champagne corks. I hovered near the edge, largely unseen. A few nodded politely, most assumed I was event staff. The garden glittered in white and gold. Banners stretched across the pergola. Tribute for 62 years. It felt less like a party, more like a shrine to someone else's history. From the podium, Edward rehearsed lines, a thick script beside him. Nathan and Claire floated gracefully through the crowd, shaking hands. No one asked where I'd been. No one mentioned my name. Behind the curtain near the stage, I stood alone with 2 papers in my pocket. The DNA results and David's letter. Both heavy, both sharp. Then came the applause. Edward took the stage, speaking of legacy and vision, of building something that would endure past his lifetime. He paused, smiled, and lifted his hand. "This," he declared, "this is my son, Nathan Cross, the man who will carry our name forward." Nathan stepped onto the stage. They embraced. Cameras flashed. Applause thundered. And I stood there, unseen. I wasn't even a footnote in the story. My fingers tightened on the sealed packet in my jacket lining. This could have been the moment. The stage, the microphone, the truth finally laid bare. I moved one step toward it. Nathan caught my eye. No anger, no panic. Just a silent warning. Don't. And in the back of my head, Edward's voice echoed like a verdict. Some things will never bend, no matter how hard you try. I stepped back. The applause went on without me. No one noticed I was leaving. At the inn, I peeled the cream parchment name card, Daniel Cross, from my lapel and dropped it in the trash. I sat down, opened my laptop, and wrote to Mr. Whitmore. I won't be pursuing inheritance. What I wanted from this family was never money. I signed it with the name I had. It'd hidden too long. Daniel Turner. 10 days later, back in Riverbend, I carried no rage, no tears. Only a heavy silence that trailed me everywhere. People like to say speaking the truth brings freedom. Sometimes all it leaves is wreckage. No one bothers to sweep up. The phone rang. Margaret. She didn't defend herself or her husband. She only said, "Daniel, can you meet me?" Not at the Manor. At the corner cafe on Brookside and Main, where she used to take me after every exam. She looked older, not by years, but by the weight of unspoken things. She told me that when she first learned she was pregnant with me, she stood by the lake for 2 hours. Not because she wanted to end her life, but because she didn't know if I deserved to begin mine inside that house. For the first time she wept, not as a mother or wife, but as a woman who had made a choice that cost her everything. That night I found a letter waiting, handwritten by David Turner. Just one line. Daniel, you don't have to forgive, but don't let them decide how you carry pain. He wasn't trying to rescue me. He was giving me permission to stop pretending I hadn't been bleeding all along. Days later, I visited my grandfather's grave. To my surprise, Nathan and Claire were there. Claire approached, voice unsteady. I'm sorry I hid that letter. I thought if you knew, you'd leave forever. Nathan said nothing. He simply pressed a small key into my palm. It belonged to one of Father's locked study chests. Inside, I found stacks of files, and in the corner a packet marked personal. Dozens of letters addressed to me. None ever sent. One unfinished read. If I die before I fix what I've done, I hope Daniel understands. I was more of a coward than a bad father. I sat on the floor for hours with that envelope in my lap. Cowardice isn't redemption, but it is confession. It meant he knew. He just never had the courage to face it. A crisp morning found me driving west toward Ashtonville. Leaves were turning, skies pale blue. I wasn't looking for a father. I just wanted to know I hadn't begun as someone's denial. In my jacket lining was an old unsent note I had once written to Edward. You had a choice. You didn't choose me. At a rest stop under a maple tree, I lit it and watched the ash scatter. I no longer needed him to choose me. I had already chosen myself. Before reaching Westmont Institute, I detoured to my old high school. The halls smelled the same, textbooks and polished linoleum. Mrs. Hargrove, my literature teacher, recognized me. She smiled gently. You've always reminded me of your mother. Such a small thing to say, yet it struck deep. Maybe I hadn't been wrong all along. Maybe I'd just been planted in the wrong soil. Eventually, I pulled up to a modest wooden house framed by red maples. I didn't knock. The door opened and David Turner stood there, gray-haired, steady. Coffee? He asked. I brew it strong. No embrace, no DNA talk. Just two men at a kitchen table, watching the morning pass through fogged glass. No one tried to repair what couldn't be wrought, repaired, and somehow, that was enough. Back in Riverbend, I placed a digitally rendered photo on my desk. A boy, me, laughing in Margaret's lap, a moment never lived, but imagined into being. I turned on my podcast recorder. My voice is steady. If you've ever wondered whether you're worthy of love, let me tell you this. You don't need anyone's permission. Not a family name, not a bloodline. You only need to believe you matter, and then write your own story. I paused, then ended the recording. No longer Daniel Cross. Just Daniel. And that was enough.